let me know when you
Yep,
have
so it
started.
says just preparing. So as soon as it does go live, I'll go ahead and send Jess the link and Russell the link.
Excellent.
Okay,
Welcome,
we are
everyone.
live.
All right. Well, welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight for our methane rule webinar. We have with us Russell Zarbo from Clean Air Council. And Russell, I have to get my bio up here on my other screen. I apologize. We're having some technical difficulties tonight. Can you guys see that presentation again? Is that good? All right. Russell has been an advocate with the Clean Air Council since 2012. He helps residents in Pennsylvania, Delaware, and New Jersey communicate with government regarding environmental issues. He has a bachelor's degree in government with a minor in anthropology from the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia. And Russell is passionate about all things clean air and water and waste. And so welcome, Russell. Thanks for joining us today. And we're joined with members of our organization as well as other folks from around the state. So thank you for tuning in with us today. And we're here to discuss the new methane rule, the EPA methane rule, which we're going to go over some information today and talk about that. And so we're going to talk about local impacts as well, and how this methane rule will help us with new infrastructure locally. So Russell, whenever you're ready, I know you have some technical stuff to do. And you
okay, great. Yeah. Thanks, Jillian. I'm gonna share my screen so that I can control these slides.
That's cool. I think I have to stop sharing mine. Go ahead and share yours.
Okay, great. Thanks everybody for coming. Please feel free. There's going to be a couple of pauses in here for questions. But if something is in your mind, please just chat it, and Jillian or Jess will interrupt me. Because if you have a burning question, so to speak, we want to answer that. So again, there's a new EPA pollution standard for oil and gas sites that is currently up for comment. We'll keep repeating this, but comment closes January 31st, and it's extremely important for all U.S. residents, but particularly residents impacted by the gas industry, to comment on this. This is a federal issue. I know most of us are, I'm in Philadelphia right now. I know most of Protect PT's audience is in Westmoreland County and Allegheny County, but this is really a national issue, and we'll talk about a lot of the different implications of this rule, which is really what gets me excited about it. And just to leave you with something before we really get into the technical aspects, this is an innovative, unique rule for a ton of different reasons. But let's just get into it. So what are we talking about? We are talking about hydraulic fracturing, gas drilling, fracking as it is called. And this is a great tool from our friends at Frac Tracker. This is what we're looking at. This is the so-called shale play in Western Pennsylvania. Washington County, Pennsylvania's most heavily fracked county. Westmoreland County is right there. And I'm not sure if people realize this, but Pennsylvania is the #2 gas extracting state behind Texas right now. But Pennsylvania is actually growing faster as a fracking state. And there's real potential for Pennsylvania to actually surpass Texas this year, which would mean that Pennsylvania, particularly southwestern PA, is the most impacted by this rule. So this is why we're here tonight. This is a very rosy depiction of hydraulic fracturing. I don't want anybody to think I'm too much of a propagandist, so I try to use a diversity of pictures. But if you're not familiar with hydraulic fracturing or fracking, this is what it is. The gas industry electrifies the ground creates these small cracks in the shale layer. They then inject a bunch of corrosive chemicals, suck it out, and then they take whatever comes out with that, most of which is methane gas. But it's going to really be an important part of this presentation, and something to consider is that, it's mostly methane gas, but they are truly, digging a hole in the ground and then seeing what comes out. And that's why there's a really big discussion of like, what exactly is natural gas? What exactly is methane? There's a few different components to it. But it's important to consider that, we call it natural gas, which sounds like one thing, but it's really just, what our fossilized Earth is producing. So again, I like to juxtapose these two pictures. This is, a nice, fun cartoon, and this is actually what we're dealing with in Southwest PA and other areas. We're going to talk about flaring a lot. There's a prospective part of this rule that would completely ban gas flaring, which I'm really excited about. So yeah, this is a pretty scary picture. And again, I don't know if people realize this. Let me get my pointer going. But not only do we heat about half of the homes in this country with natural gas, in Pennsylvania particularly, we are getting all of our electricity. This is a true chart. This is the actual statistics from October, and you can see that we get the lion's share of our electricity from natural gas now, which is why there is this huge boom of hydraulic fracturing. There are new natural gas plants popping up all over the place. Clean Air Council has a few different campaigns, but we'll talk about how this is different from those power plants. But just to really, let people know why this is important and to see how tiny that renewable section is. We get a ton of our electricity from natural gas fired power plants. And the oil and gas industry is the largest contributor to methane emissions, even larger than the agricultural industry or landfills. If you separated out oil drilling and gas drilling, then agriculture would be slightly higher. But if you combine the two, it is the single largest source of methane emissions. And if people have questions, I'm happy to talk about the methane that comes from landfills or the methane that comes from livestock. But I think one of the major points to consider is it would almost be impossible to regulate agricultural methane. They're doing good things in regulating landfill methane, but to talk about the prospects of regulating agricultural methane, it's really complicated. And on the flip side of that, it's really, really easy to reduce methane from natural gas drilling sites and transportation sites. And we'll talk about why that is in this presentation. So again, this doesn't cover, every part of the natural gas industry. You can see in the lower right-hand corner, it's not covering, the hookups to your house. I live in the city of Philadelphia. We have, the country's largest gas utility. It wouldn't cover any of that stuff. It covers the extraction and the initial compression and treatment. If you want to think about, this timeline from coming out of the ground to coming to your home, this rule would cover about 2/3 of that situation. And then this is a little bit, I try to, balance between the really technical stuff and the more readily understandable. And please, again, just scream questions if you have them. So this, in 2015, the EPA started the idea of regulating new sources of methane emissions, new gas drilling sites. And the Clean Air Act actually makes a very firm distinction between new sources and existing sources. And one of the really important parts of that distinction is that when we regulate new sources, the federal government takes the lead. When we regulate existing sources, the state does, and the federal government has to approve that plan. And there are a lot more existing sources than new sources, which makes sense. And one of the really important, somewhat frightening aspects of this rule is that the state of Pennsylvania is going to have to figure out a way to apply the EPA's rule. They will then submit a plan to EPA on how they're going to do that, and then various decisions get made, and the federal government has the power to come in and say, what you're doing is wrong, and we're going to take control of this. So it's quite a complicated regulatory situation. But I'm going to really talk about some of the very more understandable parts of this rule. And again, I mentioned the comment period closes January 31st. So I guess not this coming Monday, but next Monday. And this really hits at one of the reasons why this rule is so important. You see this supplemental proposal in 2022. The EPA has really received more and solicited more public comment on this rule than usual, which is one of the reasons why an advocate like me gets excited about it. So what is actually happening right now? The initial comment period that we're in is really going to help us shape the final rule proposal that's going to happen in later in 2022. So that's one of the really big reasons why this is so important. Is it's not just commenting, whether we like or not like the final rule. The EPA is really, asking impacted residents, how do you feel about this? They're sort of bringing us along in the various steps of this, which doesn't happen all the time. Sometimes they just have a final rule and you get to say whether you like it or not, but they are more than usual soliciting public comment. And this is why. This is, the stuff that we're trying to do. When the EPA makes a rule proposal, they have to calculate the benefits of it versus the cost of implementing it. Because these rules require new technologies. They require the gas industry to spend a lot of money for good reason. But then they have to justify that by all of the savings. So yeah, we're talking about $4.5 billion in climate benefits. There's some really, now there's a metric where we talk about climate change where we quantify it in billion-dollar disasters. The US gets 10 or 20 billion-dollar disasters every year caused by climate change. And we'll talk later about how powerful a greenhouse gas methane is and its climate impacts. But I sort of mentioned earlier that, natural gas has many, many components. And that's why it's divided up down here. There's the greenhouse gas component of methane. There's the volatile organic compound component, which creates smog pollution. And then there's the hazardous air pollutant, which includes carcinogens like benzene. So that's another one of the reasons why this is such an important rule, is it is a rare opportunity to regulate all these different kinds of air pollution at once. It's really the main three categories: greenhouse gases, what's called criteria pollutants like smog, and then hazardous air pollutants that some of which can cause cancer. Okay, so the creation of ozone, and I'm sorry if people are already aware of this, but it can be pretty complicated. So one of the big parts of this is a volatile organic compound. Methane itself is at once a greenhouse gas and also a volatile organic compound, which is what VOC means in this graphic. But the real, my main pollutant of concern, besides for carcinogens and greenhouse gases, is ground level ozone. That's really what most people attribute, your common asthma incidents, if you're, bothered by a respiratory situation. That's probably caused by ground level ozone, which is really hard to regulate because it is not emitted. It is created in our atmosphere from other pollutants that we emit. So if I had a better graphic, there would be a gas well. Gas wells produce, VOCs and the same pollutants that come from cars and industrial sources. But it's important to consider that when we talk about ground level ozone, it's a main pollutant of concern, but it's actually created in our atmosphere. And climate change has a lot to do with it because it's created by heat. VOCs react in heat in the atmosphere to form ground level ozone. So obviously the hotter it is with global warming, the more ground level ozone we're going to get. And then that's another interesting thing about this rule. The gas pollution at once provides volatile organic compounds, which create ground level ozone. And then it also accelerates climate change, which further creates ground level ozone. So some interesting science in there. And just to be clear on what ground level ozone exactly is, I know a lot of people are aware of the ozone layer and the environmental concerns there. We're talking about ground level ozone, same exact substance. It is the O3 molecule. It's incredibly useful in our stratospheric layer to filter out the sun's UV rays, and incredibly dangerous at the surface level. And it's really for those exact same reasons, you know, a chemical strong enough to filter out the sun's UV rays, it's not something you want to be breathing in. But unfortunately, there's a lot of it. And we're going to talk a lot about air monitoring today. And I'm sure there's going to be questions. So this is the state's air monitoring network. And don't be too alarmed. It's probably alarming that there's no monitors in Allegheny County. That is because the Allegheny County Health Department administers its own air monitoring network, just like the city of Philadelphia does. But it is alarming that there is only one air monitor in Westmoreland County. So we'll talk about, you know, why that's a problem. So again, this is air quality in Westmoreland County. This is a really cool tool from the EPA. You can type in any county and see these readings. So in 2021, y'all had seemingly a perfect air quality year. You know, the dangerous days are yellow, orange, red, you know, that scale. You might see those alerts on the news. So by one measure, you had none, but that might be more indicative of lax air monitoring than actually pristine air quality, which is another thing why this rule is so important. And then the flip side of that, you know, y'all had no action days last year, but Westmoreland County still fails the federal standard for ground level ozone. And you can see, yes.
Oh, sorry, real quick. I'm sorry to barge in, but
No.
somebody was asking in the chat, and I know that you wanted to answer some of these questions as they came in. So can you drop the link to the tool you're currently using? I think that means that the tool,
EPA tile plot tool.
Yeah. I also wanted to mention too, you had mentioned the Westmoreland County air monitor. I have to say that is not near any of the shale gas wells.
Well, the funny thing about that, and this is, you know, the heart of this presentation. So that's an excellent question, and, you know, keep them coming because this is really going to drive the presentation. Air quality monitoring is sort of, nonsensical would be, it's counterintuitive because it's actually intentional not to have it around specific pollution sources, because the goal is to create an average. They're not trying to tell you about, you know, what the person across the street is doing or what, you know, these local sources are. You know, that's totally intentional. They want, you know, an average that's not directly impacted by anything. And there's parts of this rule that could potentially fix that. And yes, it's hard for me. I can't share things while I'm sharing my screen. But we're going to share this whole slideshow, and for the slide with that tile plot, all the actual tools, you know, every single thing is cited in this. So once you have that presentation, and, you know, you could take this presentation and go give it to your friends. I would be thrilled to have that. This is not proprietary data, and most of this information is, you know, stuff I got from other sources. So I'm totally in favor of the free distribution of this. That is the entire intention.
And we have another question. Doesn't the EPA have to have a significant number of data points across the MSA for accurate reporting?
Yes and no, but in their eyes, it's the state of Pennsylvania. You know, that's how they're distributing. You know, this is the state of Pennsylvania air monitoring network. It's not the Westmoreland County air monitoring network.
Yeah.
And then it gets really complicated because you saw from that graphic, they couch Westmoreland County in this sort of southwestern PA airshed. You saw there's a list of counties there. They do the same thing in southeast PA, They do the same thing in Central. They cluster a few counties together. They even do it with states. We're all, by a certain measure, the entire state of Pennsylvania fails the federal ozone standard because we are in what's called the ozone transport region, which is like, several states in the mid-Atlantic. So there's all kind of different ways that they, draw out these sites. But that's a great question. Are we good to, should we keep
You're
going?
good to go.
But
Sorry about
please,
that.
oh no, please, opposite of apology. I love questions. Trying to keep an eye on time. So this is, this is the big deal. We shot this information from the heavens, so you probably heard it before, but methane is 87 times more potent a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide over the 20-year time frame. It's really important. That's why it's strong. That's why it's important. The EPA now currently says that methane from the oil and gas industry is responsible for a full third of the climate chaos that we are currently experiencing. And it could even, that science is inexact, and that might change in the future. There's always new research being done. But yeah, methane is a powerful greenhouse gas, and I'll tell you that one of the future things that I'm concerned about is to this date, there's been no research about the localized impacts of greenhouse gas. Greenhouse gases are considered global pollutants, which means, it doesn't matter where they're released. They all go high up into the atmosphere and mingle together and create this bubble around planet Earth. But, in 10 or 20 years, we might get new information that says that greenhouse gases have local impacts. So that's important to consider. And I understand that's a very, a complicated idea. You're all here, so you're probably hip to climate change, but I never miss an opportunity. And this is, not something I made. This is from the state of Pennsylvania. Made this report, their climate impacts assessment. And yeah, this is, I feel a camaraderie with my friends in Southwest PA, because these are the two extremes of climate impacts in Pennsylvania, in Southeast and Southwest. So yeah, we're seeing Pennsylvania is going to get hotter, and it's also going to get wetter. And you can see that, the same regions face these accelerated impacts.
Russell,
I was going to take a break here, but let's pause for a second.
Yeah, I want to mention too, we're streaming live on Facebook, and it's a good thing because for some reason, Zoom is not cooperating for everybody, and people are having trouble logging in. It's making them log in twice or something, which I know Jess had the same issue, and I'm not sure why that's happening, but we apologize. There's really, I don't know if there's anything we can do about that, but we have had some technical difficulties recently with Zoom. So if you want to, you can pop questions in the chat as well on Facebook. And I am monitoring the chat on my phone. So if you have questions, just feel free to pop them in the chat on Facebook, and I will ask Russell your questions so we don't miss anybody.
Yeah, and well, nobody's going anywhere. You'll have my email. Everybody who wants this information is going to receive it. So we're about to look at some really cool pictures. This is a pressure gauge, a controller at a gas well site. Looks fine. Looks like there's nothing coming out of it. And our friends at Earthworks had these really cool optical gas imaging cameras. And, this is the wanton methane VOC pollution that comes from, we say, every facet of the gas industry. And a really important part of this, and, why it took so long for EPA and others to figure out what to do about this, our whole universe of air quality regulations, the entire Clean Air Act, was built to monitor refineries and coal plants, things that have smokestacks. We're not talking about smokestacks here. We're talking about emissions from every joint and valve on drilling rings. We used to call them leaks, but then once we started seeing data like this, it's like, this doesn't seem like a leak. This seems like you just turned on the valve and decided to release some methane. So it's a funny thing in how messaging evolves over time. We don't, now we really discourage the use of the term leaks because we feel like it kind of minimizes that impact, where, we really want to be addressing this direct air pollution. So that was one piece of infrastructure. Again, a natural gas storage tank. This is where, after the gas comes out of the ground, they go into these tanks. And again, that's leaking. All this stuff is highly pressurized because of how volatile methane is. And the more pressure you have on something, the greater chance of a leak. And, again, every valve in this situation is releasing pollution. That's a big part of this rule, is just doing this kind of monitoring and tightening these valves, fixing malfunctioning equipment, or maybe stopping operation if they can't figure out how to fix it. So again, if you take nothing away from this presentation, it's, increased monitoring to fix and repair emission sources on the spot in real time. And hopefully, connected with residents. We're going to talk about Protect PT's really fabulous complaint reporting tool, which will hopefully be a big component of this rule, because the EPA, they're saying they want to hear from residents about how to fix these problems. And again, one of the big parts of, the gas industry, we obviously have been extracting fossil fuels in Pennsylvania since before the United States was a country. So we have a lot of old stuff. And again, this stuff just releases what's in the ground in perpetuity, which is a lot to think about. We're not going to talk about it too much here, but there's you could attend a whole hour presentation about abandoned gas wells and the pollution impacts that they have, but can't cover everything. This is another thing I'm really excited to be able to share this presentation, the actual digital version, because this is literally a quote from an op-ed that I recently published that I was pretty proud of. And, I'm a big air monitoring person. We do it with different sources in Eastern PA and Delaware. And I'm really excited about the prospect of a community-centric air monitoring network that could be a part of this rule. And again, Jillian mentioned, the one monitor in Westmoreland County that's not near anything. And that's what the word site-specific means in this sentence. We're not talking about putting one monitor dead center in Westmoreland County. We're talking about lots of monitors and pointing them at specific pollution sources, which is the way, that's a design flaw of our air monitoring network. We get this information that we have pollution, and it's like, well, where's it coming from? I have no idea. We only have one monitor in Westmoreland County. So again, I really, I was talking to Jillian earlier about how this presentation would double as like a Rolodex of all of our wonderful friends. Earthworks is just doing tremendous work. And, these are real cameras, optical gas imaging cameras that are bringing this all to life. And they've sort of, got the ball rolling on this. So I'm incredibly appreciative of their work. And it's really interesting. I mentioned the sort of the older model of air quality monitoring, and it was, we used to talk about technology in the sense of boiler technology and drilling technology and all this kind of stuff. But now the new EPA rule is introducing air monitoring technology and putting that on the same plane as some of the industrial stuff. So I'm really excited about that and sort of like institutionalizing the use of these cameras. Pretty cool stuff. And then again, to get to all that, to get the lax air monitoring, why we need air monitoring, EPA has admitted that it underestimates emissions from oil and gas development, which is really heavy to think about. And the main reason because, and it's crazy because I don't think people realize this, prior to, 2015 and the attempt to regulate gas drilling wells, all of air quality regulations were based on types of technology. So as long as you're using an approved technology, that's what they're basing their pollution estimates on. They're truly estimates. They're not actually being monitored. And again, that might help you for a coal boiler where the manufacturer tells you that this releases 1,000 pounds of carbon dioxide per hour if you're burning this type of coal. But when we're dealing with malfunctioning equipment, the industry, you can't provide estimates about malfunctioning equipment, which is why, we need this direct air monitoring, and it hasn't been done previously. And again, I'm going to go through this really quickly, but if people are, I know there's a big, huge debates about the infrastructure bill in the Senate right now. And to, give you a reason why this stuff is important, the EPA has $25 million to give in air monitoring grants, and it's based on it's from funds allocated in the American Rescue Plan, the so-called bipartisan infrastructure bill. So if you're curious where all this infrastructure money is going, it's going to air monitoring grants and other cool stuff. So again, Protect PT has this wonderful reporting tool. You're going to have this presentation with links to everything. And we, make these reports because we need to build a record as to, why do we need to do all this air monitoring? Because people are finding lots of sources of pollution. It's a huge part of my legal work at Clean Air Council is, building cases. They don't just pull EPA rules out of thin air. They're based on, complaints that people make. So you really kind of give yourself a paper trail with things like this. Even if you think, the state's not going to respond or care or whatever, still make the complaint because, you need to be able to say that you, the legal term is exhausting all possible avenues, which is a big thing.
I have a comment real quick. So there's someone on Facebook, Mabel, that said they live near a coal non-gen plant, no monitoring. UNC owns it. There must be crop invisible, and they're in the southern part of the state. And so I would suggest, Mabel, that if you live near, or if you want to contact Russell or someone at Clean Air Council, perhaps they could assist you with air monitoring, or you could find someone that's doing that in the region that could help you with air monitoring. And I also want to mention too, with this Protect PT reporting tool, anyone can use it across the state. It is not just for here in Westmoreland County. Anyone can use it. It's really, really easy to use. It's just report.protectpt.org. You can put it on your home screen of your phone. It acts like an app, but it's actually just a really smart website that can be used on any device. So if you don't have a smartphone, if you don't have a tablet, you can do this from your computer too. So we wanted to try to make something that was super accessible to lots of people, and that there would not be barriers for folks, and that it was easy to use, so anyone could use it from across the state. And so, for instance, if we get a report from someone on the eastern side of the state, our friends at Clean Air Council will give them that information, because they then can connect with that resident and help them find ways that they can either mitigate or make those other complaints. And we're looking at expanding this app and trying to integrate it. When you finish your complaint on the app too, it takes you right to a screen where you can click a button and make that same complaint to DEP. You can download your report and send it to DEP. You can take pictures and you can upload pictures. And there's just a lot of functionality to it. And if you want to learn more about that, we have a really great catalog of lunch and learns on YouTube. I'm going to pop the YouTube link in the chat. We are also going to have our friends at Earthworks coming to talk about methane and the work that they did here in Protect PT. So I just wanted to mention that, and I will stop talking, let you go forward, Russell.
We are in the home stretch. I really appreciate people's patience here. And again, I talked about creating a paper trail with the state. One of the other great things about doing this, it's a great way to talk to your elected officials. I know this isn't, you might not agree with this, but, elected officials want to know that you're, they don't want to do all the work for you. They want to, get you over that last edge, maybe. So it's a really great thing, if you're talking to an elected official, don't start with your complaint. start with what you've been doing and how it hasn't gotten you to where you need to be. So I think it's a great, if you're, you live by a coal plant that you're fed up with, you want to start that conversation with, I've been making reports to DEP all month and nothing's happened, and now I need to, escalate this situation. So there's tons of really good reasons to make these reports. Yeah, so we're going to get a little more technical for a second, and then we're going to stop and talk about this. So these are some of the big parts of the rule. They divide up the wells depending on pollution levels. It's how often they're proposing to inspect them. But one of our big questions is, how are you going to establish those baseline pollution levels? So that's really, if all you did was comment to EPA to tell them to, spend a year air monitoring before you even make these conclusions about who emits more than 3 tons per year or who emits less than 3 tons per year. Because this stuff is going to matter. That's a huge difference between a one-time survey of leaks for so-called small wells and then leak detection every 3 months. That could be the difference of a decimal point. So it's really important that this monitoring is done really well. And one of our big points, and we'll sort of pull this out later, is, they say the threshold here is 3 tons per year, but they also say the average small well emits 2.2 tons per year. So for us, that's like way too, like, why isn't the threshold 2 then? If they, so there's some really important things to be done in terms of testing requirements. And we've been talking a lot about air monitoring. So again, that's from an EPA presentation. And you see this is designed less well because I put it together, not the EPA. So again, the big issue here, how can we rely on these, annual estimates when we know that leaks can occur at any time from any source? Like, it's really dangerous to, oh, well, we did, a week of monitoring and we're not going to investigate the site for another year. Lots of stuff can happen at this equipment. And the EPA itself has come out and said, the vast majority of pollution from gas well sites is from aging equipment. So if that's the case, that's added attention. That's not, those things can be fixed. So it's really important. And again, that all adds up to increased air monitoring. How can we even quantify these sites if we haven't done proper air monitoring? And this is one of my biggest issues with the rule. And I try to be a pretty technical person in certain situations. And whenever we're reading a rule and we see the word reasonable, I highlight it with a big red marker, because it's one of those things, okay, as soon as you throw out that word reasonable, it becomes so subjective. So the EPA has this kind of interesting language in the rule that says if there is a reasonably accessible retail gas line, then the entire gas operation has to collect all the emitted methane and put it back into that line, which basically means zero air pollution, which is what we want to get at. But it's sort of absurd because, all gas wells have pipelines. That's the whole point, is that they connect to pipelines. So how are they going to deal with this whole reasonably accessible language? So again, it would be well worth making the comment if the only thing you talked about was so-called reasonably accessible wells. And then again, why does it have to go back into a pipeline? These sites are covered in storage tanks. Why not just collect the methane and put it into a storage tank like the gas industry does every day? So that's one of our big comments as well, is, there's other storage techniques that you're well aware of. So why does it have to be a reasonably accessible retail gas line? So again, back to the softer language from our friends at EPA. They're calling it fugitive emissions, this monitoring. And that second part is exactly what I was just talking about. Ensuring captured associated gas is collected for a useful purpose, rather than flared. So, there's a lot of subjectivity in that language that we really want shored up. And one of the best parts about this, and we're going to talk about this more in a second, pneumatics, electrifying these sites. And this is, Clean Air Council advocates, we would have a less polluted world if everything that we use fossil fuels for was electric. If we substitute electricity, obviously electric cars, they create no air pollution. And a lot of the equipment at gas well sites can be converted to operating on electricity rather than natural gas. And it's a complicated thing that I'll sort of be a little slower about explaining. But oddly enough, natural gas is used very widely at natural gas drilling sites for a variety of purposes. And it's pretty complicated stuff. So this is exactly what we're talking about. This is a pneumatic controller. When one of the weird parts of natural gas drilling is, they electrify the ground, they pump all those chemicals, and they just take whatever comes out. And, you don't get to dictate how, geographic formations are pressurizing the gas that's coming out of them. So there's a ton of work that goes into standardizing that pressure, because, that's why there are explosions and, disasters at natural gas sites, is because that pressure becomes irregular. And this is really bizarre, but the old style pneumatic pump, and there's pneumatic pumps and controllers, they use natural gas itself to regulate the pressure of the incoming natural gas. It's a very strange thing to think about. But what that means is, if the pressure gets too high, they just open up that valve. And it's called direct venting, or even flaring is just the burning of all that gas from that open valve. And it just doesn't have to be like that. You can just have an electric pump that uses electricity to regulate the flow of gas and doesn't result in these massive, all sorts of different words for it, blowdowns, sort of these massive, just so avoidable air pollution events. And then again, that's a big part of this rule, is like, this is not, we're not asking people to install $1 million mercury scrubbers like they did in coal plants for the last however many years. Simple upgrades in technology that would actually save the gas industry money. Environmentalists are in this bizarre situation where we just want the gas industry to keep their own gas and then make money off of it. Like, what a aggressive industrialist I am, telling the gas industry to keep their own pollution.
I'm sorry, before you move on, I have a really quick question, and I don't want to get too far in the presentation because it's about...
We only have a couple of slides left. We're
okay.
Almost...
Well, then why don't you go ahead and I'll ask the question at the end. You sure?
Yeah, sure.
All right, okay. So the question is, does EPA validate measurements air quality? I think this, I asked this because it doesn't seem to be able to measure the components of VOC monitors, and this technology should be developing. So does the EPA validate the air monitoring? I think that's a question.
They should, and that really gets at kind of like a, we sort of mentioned the role that the states and the federal government have here, because really the state that's doing this monitoring, then the EPA has to accept or deny those reports. So they're completely free. And then again, when the state of Pennsylvania, it's called a SIP, a state implementation plan. After this rule is finalized, the state of Pennsylvania goes and figures out a way to implement all this stuff. And they send the report to the EPA, and the EPA can either reject or accept that report. Yes, they do. And it's complicated because the federal government can step in whenever it sees fit in a variety of situations. So, and it depends on, that's why our elected officials matter, because, with a certain administration, they might have a really active EPA that wants to go jump into Pennsylvania politics, but in a different situation, they might be like, oh, okay, you can figure that out, Pennsylvania. So that's a really great question that is sort of has a kind of a soft answer.
Thanks, Russell.
For sure. So this is, we're in summary here. I've laid a lot of information on you guys. So I really like this diagram because it shows the different upgrades that are going to get us these pollution reductions. This is from our friends at Clean Air Task Force, which is another great group that we work with. So they made this great report, 65 by 25. You want to reduce methane emissions 65% by 2025. And I really like that they divided up. So you have this big chunk of the darkest blue is from those leak detection that we talked about. The lighter blue reduction is from that pneumatic equipment we talked about. And then the smaller number is about the storage tanks and upgrading some of the other equipment. So that 12 million is where we're at now. And, it would be great to get to that 4 million by 2025. And then again, a little for all my Clean Air Act aficionados out there. The thing that preceded this rule, the first site-specific air monitoring regulation was finalized in 2015 at oil refineries. And it's really staggering to think about this. We were not directly monitoring pollution at oil refineries before like 2015, which is crazy to think about. But yeah, and surprise, surprise, they do some monitoring and find out that emissions are, exponentially greater than had previously been assumed. Yeah, so one of the big, and again, this is sort of the broader approach, and one of the reasons why I'm so excited about this rule is that, if they finalize it, it then opens the book for more community air monitoring. We want to expand it, if we started at refineries and then went to gas well sites, maybe in 5 years, we're talking about doing this at other pollution sources, at all pollution sources, rather. We could be doing it around highways if we wanted to do it. So I like to talk about, air regulations build upon themselves. So this is the kind of, and you can read this report, it'll be linked in the full presentation. This is where it started in 2015. Some other stuff I put together. We've been working with, I've been working with Protect PT for a while. We did wildly enough, this big assessment of the JB Tonkin site that we did in 2019 is still totally applicable. And DEP and our industrial friends have just been kind of dragging their feet about that. So if you want to read, we did a deep dive into a very specific site in Westmoreland County. We just did a really cool, that methane monitoring link goes to, I did an interview with Earthworks, Melissa Ostroff, who does a lot of that optical gas imaging. So we talked a lot about that, and she really explained it. And then I wrote sort of a broad assessment about methane. So you have my email, read some articles. You're going to have this whole presentation. And then I really like, I'm really into these. There are all sorts of different tools to look at your local site. And especially for the person who was talking about the coal plant they live next to, if you reach out, I'll show you how to look it up on EPA Echo. And you can see here in big dark red, your local elected official may not realize that this site's in significant violation of the Clean Air Act. We allow violations to pile up before we do anything. There's a lot of really good tools to identify nefarious pollution sources in your community. And again, Jillian, I don't know if we've talked about this, but I was looking at the DEP's page for the JB Tonkin, and they got a violation in November.
Yes, that was actually because of Earthworks coming out, and one of the slides, one of the
Nice.
First FLIR camera slides that you showed was a couple years ago when Earthworks came out. I think it was like 3 years ago when Mary was an intern. They came out. I want to say it was 2018, and they saw the flare, and we reported it. They ended up fixing 7 leaks at the site, and then we were just out there in November with Melissa, and we saw more pollution, and so they got another violation. So this technology works. It's great that we have this great resource like Earthworks. And just to let y'all know, I put it in the chat, but we are going to be with Melissa from Earthworks on our Lunch and Learn on March 29th at noon. So you can tune in. It's on our YouTube. So if you can't tune in at noon, you can watch it later. And so, that's exciting. We can bring that content to you, and we can follow up on this and keep talking about methane.
It's big. This information is out there. I'll tell you, this DEP tool is not easy to use, but it's something I'm happy to walk people through. And, once you figure out how to use it, you can get some information. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Jen.
If folks are interested, and Russell, you're interested, if there are lots of people that are on this call tonight that are interested in that training, we could even set up a smaller training for people to do that, to learn how to use that. Because I know I would like to get better at that, and we have some staff that might want to learn as well.
And there's cool water ones. There's a bunch of different ones. If you were in Allegheny County, it would be totally different because you'd be talking to the Allegheny County Health Department. If you were in Philly, it would be different because you'd be talking to all the Philly agencies. I could go blue in the face talking about all the different. I'll give you a crazy example. Because if you have an issue with an interstate railroad, you need to go to your federal elected official about that. I literally had a meeting today with Senator Bob Casey's office because a friend of mine in North Philly was trying to report a dangerous railroad crossing. City wouldn't take it, state wouldn't take it. It's an interstate railroad. You have to report it to the federal government. So I'm a huge geek about all that stuff. I love bureaucracy. I can't understand that. So again, this is, we've been talking about the pollution from the gas industry for so long, and a lot of people, obviously it's cold as heck outside, and it's easy to understand. We'll go, okay, I need this. What are we going to do without the gas? A lot of gas out there. Landfills produce it. I'm pretty sure we could power the entire country's natural gas needs if we were collecting all the methane that's coming off of our landfills, off of our sewage. The city of Philadelphia has an amazing anaerobic digester. They collect all the methane that comes off of our sewage, and then they burn it to power facilities. So there's, wonderful, super cool technology. And it could be expanding in the infrastructure bill, other stuff. I'm a huge fan. This is not just about, shutting things down. There's a lot of really good technology out there that we could support. And comment period closes January 31st. It's going to reopen for the supplemental rule in a few months. But right now we are focused on this January comment period. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see all of your beautiful faces.
Yeah, and someone had already asked about the link. So I did put the link in the chat to be able to make the comment. There's actually a sample comment that when you go to our website, which is protectbt.org, and you go to the actions page, so it's /actions, you can see not only this action, this is the top of the page is this action. You can send a message just by clicking a button here on the page. It'll send you to our form. You fill out the form, and it sends a message directly to the EPA. So Russell and other folks have put a lot of time into making a really robust comment, and we have that information. And so when you send that message, it'll send it right to the EPA.
They have some really exciting possibilities with this rule. And I'll be honest with you, it is hard to get excited about federal pollution standards sometimes. But this is a pretty innovative one. And please, I just dropped the link in the chat. Give it to your friends. It is public domain.
That's right. And for us that are facing new infrastructure, it's something that's really important for us to talk about, because these rules could really impact future infrastructure for us, and how that's really regulated, and the constraints that are on the industry to to hopefully reduce their impact. So yeah, I think this was really super informative, and I want to thank you, Russell, for all of your awesome energy and your great presentation. I thought it was awesome. And I want to open it up to, if anybody has any questions, if you want to unmute yourself and ask some questions. It is, what time is it? It's 7:27, so we definitely have a little bit of time for questions if folks want to ask.
Russell, this is Bill Cousins. I'm based in Philadelphia. You may have said this right at the beginning. I came in a little bit late, but where are you? Are you in the state here, and where are you located?
I am in your city of Philadelphia. I am at the Clean Air Council offices. I'm at 19th and Walnut right now, and I'm gonna go home to West Philly very shortly. We've been doing a lot of work around the Philly refinery, and that benzene monitoring. And it was a really, to give you an example of how vital air monitoring is. Even though the Philly refinery shut down after a incredibly dangerous fire in 2019, it was still being regulated as a refinery for all of 2020 and 2021. So that benzene monitoring was still in effect. And even though it was shut down, they were still releasing benzene at 3 times the threshold for an active refinery. It was closed. And the only reason we had that information is because of that 2015 rule. So, this stuff matters. And I really think it's going to be a big deal for the gas industry, because we're going to really monitor, all these shut down sites. I mean, like it's going to be honestly like startling once they start doing this monitoring, what they find.
And I know the community organizations there in Southwest Philly, Thrive, and some others are really active trying to monitor and make sure the cleanup of that site is done properly.
It was funny. I presented something much like this at their last meeting about all of our policy insights there. So yeah, please reach out. I am, oh my gosh, so much talk about the Philly refinery. They're almost afraid to talk about it because it's really wild stuff what's going on there. And, land remediation is a whole different situation. And what do you do with all this really contaminated land, and what are they going to build there? And a lot of fun stuff.
A lot of issues.
Russell, someone is asking, and maybe Mary can make this happen on the back end. She's on the Facebook live stream, that if we could put the link to the presentation in the Facebook live stream, I definitely think that's doable. And then
Sure.
Cliff said, I would like some echo training, PADEP, tell me the info, and what is in there. Not very user friendly by any terms. That's true. And any data from the DEP is not user friendly. And somebody that I was talking to about DEP data, you can download different reports on their website, different production, compliance, waste, all kinds of reports. And someone taught me recently, and I never thought about doing this. When you download that big table of data, sometimes it comes into this giant big table of information, and it's so hard to sort through it. A simple pivot table, which is real easy to do on Google Sheets, can really get some honed in data. It's crazy within minutes. So yeah, that's another way to get the data in a usable format, because the way that it is, it's so hard to use it from just the DEP download. And Cliff asks, what monitor do you use to measure benzene?
They're I'm going to give a really stupid answer and say a benzene monitor. It's really complicated. It's one of the difficulties of air monitoring is that I'm not sure people realize this, but basically every pollutant has to have its own monitor. There aren't just general air monitors and they spit out some receipt that says, 1 benzene and 2 VOCs and 3 methanes. They're all different. So it's really just, if you want to monitor for ground level ozone, you got to get a ground level ozone monitor. And sometimes companies will do really large, they'll have a circuit board that they can pop in and out of. So it's like, the framework of a monitor. And then if you want to monitor for VOCs, you have to buy the VOC add-on and plug that in. I'm not aware of any because there are low-cost particulate matter monitors. There's some low-cost VOC monitors. I've done a decent amount of research about, accessible air monitoring, but I'm not sure that there is a low-cost benzene monitor on the market right now, which, is the reason why all this stuff is tough.
Isn't the way that you measure air toxics, including benzene, basically, I forget the name of have a big bag and you open it up where you think you might smell something nasty. And in a minute or 3, you have this bag open, then you close it, and you send it off to California and they measure about 70 odd air toxics. And that's the only way that I know to probably benzene's part of that, because benzene is such a deadly kind of probable air toxic. But yeah. I forget the name of the how you refer to that.
That is classically the original. That is the old school resident air monitor. You can read about the bucket brigade.
Yes.
Which is a sort of a version of that. All it is, it's a one-way air valve. It takes it in. But even in that situation, the lab that you're sending it to is still having, and it really depends on how much you want to spend. It's cheaper for them. If you just ask them to monitor for VOCs, that's cheaper. If you want, the suite of benzene and other carcinogens, I would that's sort of a step away from air monitoring and more just like chemistry in terms of, they have a bag of stuff and they're going to analyze for what's in it.
I thought that specifically air toxics, as opposed to all of the criteria pollutants that you're talking about. I'm not talking about those.
Yeah, exactly. Well, in the sense of, air toxic, because it's more of a chemical situation, it's really just a test for a chemical. If you're thinking about, a COVID test, whether or not you have COVID, it turns blue or red, I'm really simplifying this, but, they have their bag of chemicals, they put a stick in there, they put the benzene stick in there, and then, if there's benzene in it, it either turns a color or not. It's more, if you were working directly with a lab, you would be able to, ask them what to monitor for. The big drawback of that is it takes so long because you wouldn't know about, the whole big thing right now is, we want to do this monitoring and then we want the government or the industry to go out there and fix the problem as it's happening. That's obviously not occurring if you have to mail it to California and then get it back. So we're trying to take a step past that to actionable levels. And that was, a difficulty, that's a big shortcoming of all air monitoring. And the, refinery benzene rule is, even within that rule, and you see that the Philly refinery emits, 5 times as much benzene as it should. Even in that rule, there wasn't a next step. It was just like, well, we know it's super dangerous. So that's why I'm excited about this rule is we're trying to take it to an actionable level in real time. But yes, that's a great, amazing reading about the bucket brigade.
So the methane rule includes benzene.
Yes, absolutely,
Ah, thank you.
for sure. But then, it's complicated because I think that benzene is just in that, it's not like, they're drilling a benzene well and benzene comes out. Benzene is just, one of the things in so-called natural gas. It's just in fossil fuels. It's
Oh, of course, the BTEX chemicals. Yeah, right. Thank you.
that's a great question.
Russell, the reason I asked about the benzene monitors, I'm working with BMAC, the Beaver County Marcellus Awareness Group. We're trying to set up a Ozone shell around the cracker plant that they're building. And I've been looking into all kinds of monitors. I do know that there are PID monitors. Are you familiar with photo ionization detectors? That kind of a monitor that can detect specific compounds if you have them calibrated to that compound, and that would give you, or you can have the best ways to have sample tubes that are made specifically to absorb different materials. But as you said, if you have that kind of a device, you got to let it absorb, then you got to take it to the lab, you got to analyze it, and by that time things may have changed and stuff. So I've been trying to look into what I'm calling episodic type exposures would be and how we could figure out rapidly what they are. We've had several smells come from the cracker plant already, and DEP does not have the ability. Well, they had the smell. Didn't you monitor or take a sample? No.
And then, how crazy is that? That's the reality of the world we're living in. Is they go out and go, I don't smell anything, get back into the car, leave.
Well, they did smell it and they did do the investigation and stuff, but I think they kind of dropped the ball a little bit by not going that extra step and taking a sample. The smell, the one in particular, lasted for 3 days, and so they had plenty of time. I can see if something happens late at night and then people complain, they go there, and by that time the air is dispersed it, but the smell was still there, and they did not take an air sample.
Yeah, one of the really difficult situations about that is that there are not good standards for construction level pollution. When that facility is fine, and Clean Air Council actually negotiated fence line monitoring as a part of the air permit for that facility. And Terry Baumgartner in Beaver County does amazing work. She works for Clean Air Council. But that's, all that permitting stuff is for the final result. Really lacks standards for, works in progress, I'll call it. Which is a really tough situation.
And I want to mention, so there are a lot of instances where air pollution is and these chemicals are a problem. We were just in Plum, Pennsylvania, which is in Allegheny County last night, where the off-gassing or the venting of their tanks when they this is for an injection well, so they're have this waste in the big tanks that store all the waste, and in order to put more waste in the tanks, they have to open up these valves, and the people that live downwind are smelling really terrible smells from there. And so it's there's an issue that has been raised by the 43rd grand jury report by the Attorney General's office, that really the onus of monitoring for this stuff should be on the regulatory agency and on the operators, and it's just not. It's on us. It's on people like us that live in the community, and it should be the other way around, right? We shouldn't be talking about how we can capture pollutants with different monitors and trying to scrounge for funds to do that. It should be on the DEP to go out and take this seriously and do that work. But until they do, until we get a government that functions in Pennsylvania, we're going to have to take it on ourselves. And so I guess the nice thing is that there are things like that EPA grant that are available.
And that's one of the really tough things about there. That grant is almost more nonprofits can apply for it, and lots will, but it's also for local governments.
Yeah.
To apply for. So that we're actually in a crazy situation. I was having a phone call with some, like, how do we pressure a government to apply, to write and apply and do something? It's a sort of a weird situation. Yeah, that, I mean, to all of our, that's another reasons why elected officials matter. I mean, I'll talk about the shortcomings of DEP all day, but the state legislature is not doing them any favors. I think there's something crazy like 400, 500 open vacancies at DEP.
Yeah.
Just because they don't have money, they're not paying people.
Yeah. Well, and it has to be demoralizing that you go to school for biology or you go to school for environmental science and you're like, I'm going to do some good and work at the DEP. And then you get there and you're told, nope, can't do that.
I had a friend of mine in Philly who worked for the DEP's so-called Environmental Justice Office for one day.
Yep.
Because they were like, oh, I'm going to do this cool thing.
Yeah.
And then took a couple of meetings. I was like, I'm going back to Philly.
Yeah. Yeah. It's got to be really tough. Those folks, and they're pressured to permit things that, maybe they normally wouldn't. And, so, but that's another matter for another day.
Oh yeah. I mean, you have a state legislature that's like, oh yeah, just let them pour the waste on roads or whatever. They're, the ideas that our state legislature is coming up with these days is really,
who cares about radium-226 and 228? It's just a bone seeker. We'll just have holes in our bones. It's all good.
Even we come out, they wanted to elect judges by municipality, even though that has nothing to do with our judicial system. Like, they're really bizarre things being proposed in. And there's another one of the things, we did a comment on this this week or last week, I can't even keep. They wanted to ban localities' ability to ban natural gas hookups. A lot of really progressive municipalities that have, big climate plans, they say, we want to electrify our entire county. Let's, stop doing these new gas hookups. And our friends in the state legislature want to pass a bill that would ban the ability for localities to regulate energy use.
And that bill is being called the Energy Choice Bill.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
It's like
Obviously.
the exact opposite of what it will do.
Wow. All right. Well, to wrap it up, if no one else has any questions, I think we learned a lot today. And thank you, Russell, so much for all your time and effort into putting together the presentation, making it available for everyone. This is live on our Facebook, so we also will have the opportunity, I believe, to download it from Facebook, because I turned off the recording. Sorry, Mary. And from Zoom, so we won't have a Zoom recording, but I think we can download the video from Facebook and we'll put it.
Yeah, we can do that. It'll just take a little more time, but I can do that tomorrow.
Thank you. And yeah. So I guess in closing, go on and make a comment to the new methane rule. And you can do that at protectbt.org/actions. And yeah, get involved with local organizations. If you're in Philly, get involved with Clean Air Council. And if you're over here in Southwestern PA, get involved with Protect PT. And thanks so much for joining us tonight, everyone. Have a wonderful evening, and let's try to take care of this pollution.
Thanks,
Great
everybody.
program. Thank you all.
Bye, everyone.
Great questions.